The teacher was king over Israel in Jerusalem. I applied my mind to study and to explore by wisdom all that is done under the heavens. What a heavy burden God has laid on mankind. I have seen all the things that are done under the sun. All of them are meaningless, a chasing after the wind. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in the darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this is meaningless, for the wise, like the fool, will not be long remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise must die. The word of the Lord for the people of God.
Thank you, Pat. Well, friends, let's pause for a moment of prayer. Gracious God, may these words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be found faithful in your sight. For you, God, and you alone are our rock, our strength, and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, today we are in week 2 of our Lenten sermon series on Ecclesiastes. And last week we began by really just doing a introduction to the book, and the main word that I am going to suggest is the key to unlocking all of the depths of wisdom that Ecclesiastes has for us. There's one Hebrew word that shows up over 40 times throughout the 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes, and the word is hevel. And I didn't put it up on the screen last week, so I put it up here so we can see how it's spelled. Hevel. That's a Hebrew word. Can you say that with me? Hevel. You got it. Wonderful. And we talked about last week how most of our English translations translates hevel as meaningless, like in the NIV, or vanity. But hevel really, in its original Hebrew, doesn't mean that there is no meaning to life, and it doesn't mean that we're just self-absorbed people who are looking in the mirror all the time. What hevel really means is better translated smoke or vapor. And it's not that life has no meaning, but that its meaning is often mysterious to us, enigmatic, it's a puzzle. Sometimes life doesn't make sense, and when we try to understand the mysteries of life sometimes when we try to be in control of everything, it's like we're trying to grasp and hold on to smoke or vapor. It just goes right through our fingers. And so Ecclesiastes 1 that Pat read part of for us, thank you again, Pat, that was a good introduction, is a reminder that not only is life mysterious, but life is short and fleeting. And despite our best efforts to believe otherwise, of course, one day all of us will die. And will return to the dust that we were made from. And this is not a welcome truth for many of us, but it's the truth that Ecclesiastes begins with, because it wants us to realize, recognize, acknowledge, be humbled by the truth that life under the sun is hevel. Because that's the key to changing our perspective, to live wisely when life doesn't make sense. The message of Ecclesiastes 1 in a nutshell, if you're familiar with Mary Oliver's famous poem, The Summer Day, could be summed up in, doesn't everything die at last and too soon? This is hevel. But surely there's more to say, because there's 11 more chapters in Ecclesiastes, and there's 6 more weeks of this sermon series, including today. So hopefully there's something more meaningful than just life is Hevel and we're all going to die. I mean, surely Ecclesiastes is not telling us that we just should sit on our hands and wait for death to overtake us, right? How shall we live once we recognize and acknowledge that life is short, mysterious, Hevel? As Mary Oliver continues in that wonderful, beautiful poem, "Tell me then," she says, "what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?" This is the question. And this is the question that Ecclesiastes 2 attempts to answer. Last week we talked about how Ecclesiastes is authored from the perspective of the teacher, who is like an old sage who is sitting in his armchair towards the end of his life, and he's being interviewed for a podcast, is kind of what it feels like. And he's sharing all the wisdom he's gained throughout his years. And here in chapter 2, at the beginning, we see how the teacher sets out to find on his own some sense of meaning and purpose in life. He wants to find out, if life is Hevel, then what is good for humankind to do on these few short years that we have. So he goes to try to find some sense of meaningful purpose and lasting significance. And so he begins his journey by applying his mind and learning as much wisdom as he can. He goes to college, he gets a degree, he gets another degree. He learns from the best teachers possible, and he increases his wisdom so much, it says there in chapter 1, that he becomes the wisest ruler the world has ever seen. But he doesn't stop there. Next, he moves on and he gives himself over to all of the wonderful pleasures of life. He goes to Vegas, puts it all on black, and wouldn't you know it, he wins. He enjoys all the greatest pleasures. He gives himself over to alcohol, to sex, to laughter. But he's not satisfied. So next, he devotes himself to building things. He takes on great projects. He builds houses, plants vineyards, grows lush and rich gardens, and he makes a name for himself because he is productive in his work. And he becomes the greatest anyone has ever seen. His house is the envy of all the neighbors. His bank account is overflowing, and he denies himself nothing that his heart desires. No pleasure is too indulgent. And everything he has built for himself, his success, his power, his privilege, it's his reward for his labor and his toil. But at some point he realizes that all of that is meaningless. He looks at everything he's built and he realizes it's Hevel, it's temporary, it's fleeting. As the late, great Johnny Cash used to sing, he realized everything he built was an empire of dirt. It had no structure. One day it would all fall away. Because the pleasures of this world are great, but they eventually turn to ash, and they never really satisfy. Because you can't learn your way out of death, no matter how many degrees you have plastered to your wall. And all of our labor and our work, well, that too will fade away, and somebody will come behind us, and we will not be able to control what they do with our legacy. Hevel, smoke, vapor. In his own words, this is what he says about all that he experienced throughout his life, beginning in verse 20. So my heart began to despair over all my toilsome labor under the sun. For a person may labor with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, but then they must leave it all they own to another who has not toiled for it. This too is meaningless and great misfortune. What do people get for all of their toil and anxious striving with which they labor under the sun? All of their days, their work is grief and pain. Even at night, their minds do not rest. Have you ever been up at night at 3 o'clock in the morning because you were worried about your work? They say, find something you love doing, you'll never work a day in your life. It's a lie. Because when you love something and you devote yourself to it, you care about it. Anxious, striving, and toil. Work can consume us, even if we love it. This too is meaningless. Okay, so this is now bad news still. First, he told us we're all going to die, and then he's saying everything you try to do to find meaning and purpose has no meaning. Okay, teacher. So what in the world are we supposed to do? Give us something positive to hold on to here. Well, here at the end of chapter 2, at the end of his pursuit, the teacher of Ecclesiastes gives us the first glimpse of the answer. A surprise here at the end of chapter 2 that there is something worthwhile here under the sun. There is something we can do, even if there's a lot that we cannot. And here's the first glimpse. It begins in verse 24. He says, a person can do nothing better than to eat and to drink and to find satisfaction in their own toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. For who without him can eat or find enjoyment? The teacher spends his life pursuing some sense of meaning, and this is what his pursuit teaches him. There's nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in our work. Now, some of you might find it surprising that something like this in the Bible exists, because this sounds an awful lot like some secular philosophies that say the highest good in life is to indulge in pleasure. Eat, drink, and be merry, as the Epicurean philosophers used to say, for tomorrow we die. So live it up. Go to Vegas, put it all on black. It doesn't matter if you lose. But that's not what the teacher's telling us. Let's look at it once more. A person can do nothing better than to eat, drink, and find satisfaction in their toil. This too, I see, is from the hand of God. Do you hear that? The teacher's not pointing us to Vegas or to the casino floor. He's pointing us back to God. And interestingly, this here at the end of chapter 2 is the first time God is mentioned in the book of Ecclesiastes. Have you noticed this? Throughout all of chapter 1 and all of chapter 2, God is not mentioned a single time. It's as if, as the teacher goes out to try to find his way in life, he's trying to find that meaning and purpose apart from God. And it's only at the end of his life, when he realizes that all of it is futile and fading, that he realizes wisdom apart from God is hevel. Life is not something for us to take. Life is a gift. And it's a gift that comes from God. With the kids a few moments ago, I talked about the creation story in Genesis chapter 2. And in a lot of ways, I feel like Ecclesiastes is pointing us back towards the garden. Because like I shared with the kids, in the beginning when God created the world and created humanity, God did not create because God had to, but because God was filled with so much love. The outpouring of that love was to create. And in that love, God not only made you and me and all the world, but God gave us this wonderful and beautiful earth filled with good gifts. Beautiful trees with all kinds of fruits, apples and oranges, the gifts of community and partnership, everything under the sun as a gift for us to enjoy. But in God's wisdom, God also placed limitations on you and I. Not because God wanted to be mean or restrictive, but because God knew that we would be inclined to confuse our role as the created with the Creator. So God said, all of this is yours, it's my gift. Just don't eat the fruit of this one tree. It's called the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And in Genesis 3, we see the temptation of Adam and Eve that's representative of all of us to take what was not theirs to have. To take that apple or whatever it was, and it's not because the apple was the shiniest, most red apple on the tree. The temptation was to be like God. The temptation was to be in control, to know everything, and to find our meaning and purpose apart from God's good gifts. The great sin of Genesis 3 is that we see life as something for us to take for our own gain and our own profit. And every time we try to take control, like the teacher does in chapter 2, we find that happiness and joy apart from God is empty. It's meaningless. It's hevel. And so in this world that we live in, what Ecclesiastes consistently calls life under the sun, let us remember that this life is not the life that God created for us, nor the life that God intended. We're living in a fallen world, as some like to say. In a world that's the result of all of the ways that we try to grasp onto smoke and forget what it means to be creatures, not the Creator. So Ecclesiastes wants to confront us and call us back into the garden, to live in a way where we realize that ultimately life, enjoyment, happiness, satisfaction is not ours to take. It's ours to receive from the hand of God, and it is only God who gives satisfaction. We cannot rule our world, and the gifts of God are not given for our own profit. They're given for us to enjoy. As Brian McLaren is known to say, life is a gift and love is the point. So enjoy God's good gifts each and every day. Enjoy good food. Enjoy good drink. Enjoy good relationships. But don't see those things as means to an end, as the thing that's going to move you to this place of self-fulfillment and satisfaction. See them as the very things that God is giving to you to enjoy this life and to be open to the way things were always meant to be, where we lived as creatures in God's good world, simply enjoying good gifts. We have but one wild and precious life to live. What will you do with yours? As we prepare to receive God's good gifts in the sacrament of Holy Communion, let us sing just a short hymn together, hymn number 640, Take Our Bread. You can remain seated.